This is Join Us in France, episode 325. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and today I bring you a conversation with Elyse about Bruniquel, one of those little towns in the southwest of France that are beautiful and have great stories behind them. Who knows, you might want to put it on your list as it's definitely out of the beaten track and a wonderful place to explore. If you like what we do here at Join Us in France, consider supporting us by going to patreon.com/join us and by visiting joinusinfrance.com/boutique to check out my cookbook, Join Us at the Table, and my Paris tours. Show notes for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/325, the numeral, where you can see a recap of what we've discussed as well as links to relevant resources. Follow Addicted to France on Instagram to see the photos of Bruniquel. I will post them this week, and I took all of them, so I'm very proud of them. The best way to stay in touch with me and with the podcast is to sign up for the newsletter at joinusinfrance.com/newsletter. And if you think that you already follow Join Us in France on Facebook and you don't need the newsletter, let me mention that Facebook is ever changing. Recently, they banned Australians from sharing links for complicated reasons that I don't really understand. The point is, Facebook is ever changing, and it's getting more and more difficult for me to reach any of you without paying to boost my posts, and I am not prepared to do that. So, sign up for the newsletter. It's free. I will not share your email address with anyone. I only write when I have something of value to share with you, so I think it's the best way forward. joinusinfrance.com/newsletter, and there will be a link in the show notes as well. Bonjour, Elyse.
Bonjour, Annie.
Now, today I'm very excited because we're going to talk about a place I've actually been to and I loved. It's actually one of the few things I've done since March. Can you believe it? So,
did you go back in the last few months?
I went back just a couple of days. I think it was the day before we went on lockdown in October.
Oh, well, good for you. I would.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't realize that. Yeah.
So I have good fond memories of that.
So how was the weather? How was the weather the day you went?
It was overcast, but fine. You know, it was fine.
It was fine.
Yeah.
It was fine. Good.
And so the place we're talking about is Bruniquel. Bruniquel. Sorry.
Yes. Bruniquel. Yes. And then part of the story of this village is why it's called that, which is a wonderful story to tell, you know. So Bruniquel is actually one of the villages that is on the list of the most beautiful villages in France, and it is also one of the most beautiful villages in Occitania.
I see.
And it is part of a collection of medieval villages that are in a corner that's kind of like north of Toulouse. It is actually, I wanted to check on the distances. It's really not that far away. It's 82 kilometers from Toulouse, which is a little over, just about 50 miles. But because you have to get there most of the way on departmental roads, it takes a little longer than you might imagine. But it's a lovely ride to get there.
Yes.
It's also not very far from the city of Albi. It's 50-something kilometers from Albi, which means that it's about, it's about a 3/4 of an hour drive from Albi. And it's a village that is up on a hill, which backs onto a cliff. We're in a corner of France where you have 3 different departments that join up. Now, I know for most people the departments doesn't mean anything, but in fact, everybody, I think, knows that the departments are named after either rivers or another attribute that's geographic. And in this case, it's on the edge of a department called the Tarn and Garonne, and it's on the river called the Aveyron River, because it's very close to the Aveyron River, which is a beautiful, beautiful river. We've talked a little bit, I think, about some things in Aveyron. Mm-hmm. And this particular village is set so that it's really kind of, it's kind of like a 180-degree, how do you say this? In other words, it's like the village itself is not completely in the round, because on one side you have this cliff that actually overhangs the Aveyron River, which is fairly high. And so the entire village is built on one side, and it's all there. The whole village exists because of an incredible castle that was the very, very first thing that was there. And like many, many ancient medieval villages, the village built up around the castle. The castle was the first thing that was there. And the history of the castle is really rather spectacular. It is a castle that is visitable. Did you visit it when you went, Annie?
Yes.
And it's of course, mostly in ruin because it's very, very old. I mean, there are a couple of rooms.
Nice views from up there.
Great views. And of course, the reason why is because the castle, which has multi levels of ages of, when it was built, but it was built originally by the Romans as what they called a castrum, which meant it was just a defensive fortification, not really a habitat, but a defensive fortification to look out over the river, because the Romans are always looking back over their shoulder, I mean, worrying about who was going to come up behind them and who was going to be in front of them. And, I mean, that was just the way they functioned. But they, of course, were pretty much all over the southwest of what is now France. So that was it. But the village is called Bruniquel because it means in ancient language, it's no point even going into the history of all of these different language things. It comes from the name of the queen, who was the queen of the Merovingian Frankish Empire. This is going back to the 500s. This is really a long time ago. And her name in ancient German was Brunhilde.
I see.
And then it became in Occitan Bruno with an H-A-U-T. And Bruniquel literally means the castle of Brunhilde. That's what it means.
Huh. So she has a nice big castle perched up.
She had a nice big castle. And in fact, going back that far, and in fact, actually for bunch of centuries afterwards, this was not where she lived necessarily. The royalty, going back to the early Middle Ages and through a good part of it, really, they moved around all the time. They never had a permanent home. Mm-hmm. She was actually a queen. The story of her life is really incredible. First of all, considering when she was alive in the 6th into the 7th century. She lived to be 67 years old, which at the time was really old, especially for a woman, because she gave birth to a lot of children.
Sure.
And she was, in fact, the daughter of the king of the Visigoths. If anybody out there really wants to know more about this, we can talk about this another time. But just know that the Visigoths were a group that basically came through this area and then settled eventually on the other side of the Pyrenees and were the rulers of what is now Spain. And when she was a young lady, she was married off by her father to one of the sons of the king of the Franks at the time, who controlled where we are now. And she therefore became a queen. And she was very much like a woman who followed her a number of centuries later, Eleanor of Aquitaine. She was extremely well educated, apparently had a very strong personality. She spoke many, many languages, and she had a real sense of politics. And so she was really a woman ahead of her time, which of course you can tell by the way I'm telling you all this. I admire enormously.
Sure.
And she and her husband, now don't laugh, his name was Sigebert the First. He was one of the sons of Clovis. Now, this is really, this is a kind of arcane history, but this is really the history of France. This is the beginning of the unification in the history of France. Their kingdom actually was not down here. Their kingdom was up in the northeast, and where her official first residence was, believe it or not, the city of Reims. Because
that's far away. That's like
it's far away, yeah.
Especially back then.
But in their travels, especially because she originally came from the other side of the Pyrenees, she had this castle built for her. Now, I don't know if anybody would ever know how many days of the year she actually spent in this castle, but it was indeed her doing that the castle was built. And her life story is absolutely incredible. And I'm not going to go into the details of it, just to know that she had a real reputation for being a strong woman, which didn't please everybody. And she had children and then grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And now this is where it gets a little bit cringy. It was one of her great-grandsons that had her executed.
Oh, no, not nice.
No, not nice. And all of this, of course, was fighting over territory and fighting over ruling of the country. And by the time her great-grandchildren, she had a whole bunch of them actually, were adults, she was considered to be someone that they needed to get rid of. And so there are apparently all kinds of stories. And I was just online this morning looking. I think I'm going to try and find a book about her. She sounds like a kind of interesting woman. So eventually, at the age of 67, she was in fact killed by one of her own great-grandchildren. But she left a huge heritage in all kinds of ways. And one of the things that she left behind was the castle of Bruniquel. And what's amazing is that it stayed a fortified castle, and we skip a few centuries, and then we get to the time of the Counts of Toulouse, which is something you and I know a lot more about, because, of course, they were the big kings and rulers of this whole area starting in the 1100s. And Bruniquel was part of a territory that belonged to the Counts of Toulouse. And the Count of Toulouse in the 1100s, his name was Raymond. There were lots of Raymonds. There were 7 in altogether. And he made a mistake. He gave Bruniquel and the territory around Bruniquel to his half-brother to rule. His half-brother's name was Baudouin, which was a name that was pretty common in the time of the Crusades and everything. And Baudouin did not like the fact that his half-brother was really the one who was ruling everything. So he decided to collude with the enemy. And the enemy turned out to be, by the early 1200s, this famous Simon de Montfort, who came down and created this big war. And the Baudouin sided with him and basically betrayed the Counts of Toulouse and all the nobility around this area, gave over Bruniquel to this invader, Simon de Montfort, along with a whole bunch of other villages nearby, villages we know and we'll be talking about. And when the Count of Toulouse found out, he had him arrested. And guess what he did? He had
somebody else killed?
Executed. What do you do?
More carnage.
This is like, you're not going to give my territory over to somebody who's an invader, who's a usurper from the north. Sorry, don't say I'm sorry now. You should have thought about this before. Basically, this is what happened. So what happened was that Bruniquel, which was in fact a very prosperous village because it was on the road to Saint-Jacques-de-Compostelle, and because it was a trading post, because it's along the river, and there are many, many villages perched up high along this river. It was a major commercial stop along the way. It was very prosperous, and in spite of the fact that Baudouin basically lost his head, literally and figuratively, the village kept on being very, very prosperous. And when it was finally taken over by the rulers of the north, the counts of the kings of France, what they did is they added a second line of ramparts around it. Now, if you can imagine, the ramparts are basically in the shape of a U, because on one side, all you have is this castle in this cliff, so there's no point in building any walls. You can't go any further. But what they did was they rebuilt a whole set of walls in the middle of the 1300s. So when you visit Bruniquel, what happens is, and this, of course, you know, you were just there recently, the main street to walk up is this narrow street that is stepped, because all of the streets are basically horizontal, going from left to right, like terraces, going all the way up to the top where the castle is. And
it was quite slippery, to tell you the truth.
Exactly. And on a rainy day,
yes.
I once took a group of college students there on a rainy day. I thought, boy, they might be carrying me out of here. You know, I don't think I'm going to make it out of here alive. I mean, I was holding on to dear life for something or other to try and not slide off these stones as I was going back down. After centuries of wear, the stones get very, very slippery, and it's really not very easy to go up and down. But it's something people should know if they ever want to visit. It is something, it's a place you have to be able to go up and down steps.
Yes, and good shoes, good walking shoes with good grip.
There is a way. The parking is all down below, but there is a way. If you go up to the place where now is really where the second set of ramparts were, you can kind of work your way around horizontally by going up the streets and kind of zigging and zagging to avoid going straight up the steps because they're rather steep. So it is possible, but you just need to know that it's not the easiest walk in the world to get up to the top. But the village itself is famous for how beautiful the houses are. And many of the houses there are from the 1400s and 1500s, when they were very wealthy merchants who lived in the area. And so the houses were fairly well preserved. It's a village, several of them in the same area, interestingly enough, that has a huge number of beautiful houses, and they all are from the 14th century, 15th century, 16th centuries, which is quite astonishing when you think about it. All of it made out of this beautiful white limestone. Some of the houses still have a little bit of the half timbering, which of course I always find so beautiful to look at, this combination of stone and the half timbering. And of course, most of them have been renovated and refurbished on the inside, so that what you see on the outside gives it a certain authentic quality, but of course it's very, very different on the inside. And when you go all the way up, you go through this doorway that has this it's a clock tower, basically. There's a huge clock up above, which is the entrance into the most ancient part of the village. And when you keep walking, you eventually get up to the top, and you get to the huge space that leads you into this castle. And the castle is really interesting. And one of the things about this castle, but also about the village, is that in the last 20 years, they have done a lot of archaeological digging under the castle, and because this is limestone cliffs, this means that there are lots of caves everywhere. And so right now, in the castle, not only do you get to see the different parts, because there are pieces from the 12th century going all the way up through into, believe it or not, the 19th century that they've little by little changed. But now, did you visit the archaeological part underneath?
You know, now that you've been talking, I'm remembering that I lied. I didn't go in the castle. It was closed. I'm pretty sure it was closed. We did so many things that day.
You probably did several other villages as well, right?
Yes, we did, right around there. So I think I lied. I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. When you go back, this is your opportunity to go back and see this. So this is what happens now, because now, besides the actual castle, which of course is largely in ruins, but with little panels and a flyer in English, so you really can get an idea. And there are arrows everywhere to indicate what the different rooms were and things like that. But now there is a section in the lower part that is devoted to the archaeological finds that were under the castle and that were also in the cliffs and the hills right around there. And it's really, really interesting because right near there, which is basically under what would be the foundation of this castle, which really, when you think about it, goes back almost 2,000 years, they found a huge cave that goes in 300 meters, which is a lot. It's long. 300 meters is really far.
Yeah.
And inside, in a huge space, they found a structure that was man-made with pieces of stalagmites, and it was dated, and this is confirmed by 3 different groups, so the last dating is absolutely certain. It was in 2014. What is astounding about this is that it's dated to 150,000 years ago.
Whoa.
Which means it was not Homo sapiens, that means us's, that built this thing. It was Neanderthal that built it.
Whoa.
And as far as they know, this is the oldest proof of any kind of activity that basically these other kinds of humans before Homo sapiens did, because they've since found in other places the fact that they buried their dead. They had certain ceremonial things with their dead, but this is a huge structure that probably was ceremonial. There are pictures of it you can actually find on the internet. In two concentric circles and bones of different animals that were found. So there was obviously some kind of ceremonial thing going on. And from the point of view of archaeology and prehistory, it really is important because it indicates that the Neanderthal were very much involved in doing things that are similar to what we do today. You know, I mean, nobody really knew about what the Neanderthal was up to and how they could function and things like that. So if you go into this archaeological space underneath, they have findings, they have objects that were found. They have things that are also from more recent times, more times that are connected to the kind of prehistory we know about from Lascaux and places like that. But it's kind of neat because the castle itself is so old, and literally starting from the bottom, you start with going back that far in history, and then you work your way up. And there's one section that's kind of like a gallery that the rooms are the ugliest because they were the most recently redone, and they're really not pretty at all. But you have a view out over the cliffs and the valleys and the Aveyron River down below, and it's really spectacular to see, you know. So it's pretty neat. And Bruniquel is basically a village. It must be suffering very much right now because, of course, it lives off of tourism.
Oh, completely, yes.
Completely.
It was quite empty when we were there because we were, you know, it's COVID times.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I was there, I guess I was there about a year and a half ago, before this whole thing started. And, there are 2 or 3 really nice little restaurants there. There are a couple of little cafes. There's even a teeny little grocery store, you know, for people who want to buy some stuff and do some picnicking. And, the parking lot down below is free. So it's really a really great place to be able to go and walk around. When you meander in and out of these streets, you know, and take a look at these different houses, it really gives you a sense of what it was like to live in a village like that in the Middle Ages. You know, the houses are very close together, but they all have very beautiful plants right around them. And, of course, they're all connected leading up to the castle. There's a couple of art galleries. And the thing about the village that's interesting is that once you they came out of the Middle Ages, it kind of went through a long period of time when nothing happened. You know, it became just this sleepy little backwater village. It was a village that was very involved in the War of Religions. Interestingly enough, it became a Protestant stronghold. We talked about what that was about with La Rochelle and things like that. And it was after the War of Religions in the early 1600s that it basically was taken over, and it was taken over by the French army for a while. A lot of people left, and then that's when it kind of just stopped having a very, very active economical situation. But in the early 1800s, this is what's kind of neat, the romantic artists and poets really became interested in ruins. The whole movement of romanticism in art and in poetry meant that they looked at these ruins in these villages, and it was like they wrote these poems about the past, and they discovered Bruniquel.
Right.
And Bruniquel became a source of a lot of poetry. And a bunch of artists, even in the 1800s, decided that it was a great place to go and stay. And it was starting with them that people started moving back into the village and fixing up the houses. And then in the early 20th century, a group of artists that were friends of Picasso moved into the village. And that is why the village is still there.
And so is it mostly populated by locals, or is it a place that attracts a lot of people from elsewhere?
I'm not sure. The statistical information includes, of course, now houses that are outside the ancient part, a little bit down below. They say there are about 650 people who live there year round. That seems like a lot to me, actually. I mean, in the actual village that you visit, I don't imagine that's where the 650 people live. A lot of people live there only during vacation. I would say that it's mostly French people, probably a few foreigners, but mostly French, but not people who live there all year round. A lot of people who come from Paris or Bordeaux and have vacation homes there. And there are, some bed and breakfasts in the village, which is kind of neat, and things like that. So like Cord, the Cord is also a village that has only a few hundred people year round, but has masses of people that come in the nice weather in the summertime and things like that.
I'm looking at the historical population data, and right now it's it's steady, but it's around 600. There were times where there were as many as, like in the early 1800s, there were as many as, maybe that's almost 2,000.
That's a lot.
Yeah. It's a small place, so yeah.
It's a lot. And I was thinking, well, what would they be? Well, it turns out that what they do, aside from the fact that it was and has always been a stop on the road to Compostelle, there is wine making in the area. The wines of Quercy, which is basically the old name for this area. And so there were merchants in Bruniquel, because obviously the vineyards were not exactly there, but there were lots of merchants there. And of course, it's where the Aveyron River meets up with a smaller river that goes into it called the Vire, V-E-R-E. So there was a lot of traffic. There was a lot of commerce going back and forth on the rivers. So in the area, there were cereals. There was a lot of, grains. There was wheat and things like that. And also wine was produced in the area. And I assume that those were the things that made these merchants wealthy. Because the actual site, when you go there, I don't know. It's not. Cord was certain villages had a specific specialty that they were known for. As far as I could find, I don't see any specialty from Bruniquel. Not really. No. But
earlier you mentioned the Neanderthal and the caves. I'm just looking it up now. That's closed to the public. So there's a room devoted to it in the chateau.
That's right.
But that's closed to the public for historical preservation and for professionals to look into it. So.
Right. No, the cave where the cave itself, yes, is closed to the public. What I was saying was that in the chateau, there are two rooms that are exhibit rooms, that are down below, and they have objects and artifacts that they've found in the cave of Bruniquel. And also they have documentation and photos of these circles that were created in the huge opening in the cave. The cave itself, of course, is closed to the public. That is true now. Pretty much every time they find a cave, they learn their lesson after last go. They just They don't open them up to people because it ruins the cave, basically.
Yeah.
You know, so.
Yeah, and this is a lovely part of France to visit because there's so much more to visit around.
Oh, absolutely.
So around there you have Penne, which also has a chateau perched on top, but that one is
absolutely, yes.
not a lot left of that.
No, but even
it's gorgeous.
It's impressive, and it's even Penne, of course, is one of the. There's a whole string of these villages in this area. It's very dense.
I think we'll do a separate
villages.
episode about Penne because it was just so beautiful. I thought
it's absolutely beautiful and very impressive. Let's put it that way.
Yeah,
it's really good.
And then in the area, you also have Castelnau de Montmiral, which I thought was gorgeous, and it's Bastide.
It's a Bastide, like Puycelsi, right?
I mean, yes, like Puycelsi. Puycelsi is another one that we could talk about. So plenty to talk about in that part of France that gets plenty of visitors, but right now they're hurting for visitors for obvious reasons, like everybody else. So, but it's so beautiful to visit those places, and just it's the kind of place where you go and spend a day and have a meal and walk around. You see it all in 2 hours, really. I mean,
yeah. You can visit the village. It is typical to do 2 or 3 of these villages in the same day. I mean, some of them require a lot more walking and hiking than others, but also because this is an area of gorges and rivers. Cliffs and gorges and rivers. So it's very, very beautiful. In fact, a lot of people what they like to do, right? I'm not sure if it's right there or a little bit further up closer to Penne, but you can actually go out onto the river. You can boat onto the river a little bit, It's quite spectacular as an area. And this part of the Southwest is much less known than, for instance, when people talk about things in Provence or things like that. And it's just absolutely gorgeous.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So now I'm looking about the personalities linked to the place, and it's funny because it's funny now, but there was this famous photographer and reporter who became a hermit. And he kind of disappeared, like literally a hermit, right? He kind of disappeared, and they found his remains in one of the caves around the area. So, So he was actually living like a hermit in a cave.
Well, I guess that's what he wanted to do. I mean, really, just kind of go away and never come back. Well, it is, of course, an area that is filled with caves. It's not famous for the caves with decorations that we've talked about that are in the Dordogne. But, again, there are many caves that have never been explored. Sure. And I'm sure that there are lots of things that they might discover if in fact, that they did explore all of these caves. But I don't think anybody can explore all of them. There are just so many of them.
Right. Right. This guy, Alain Garcenac, who was the photographer, he was found in 2013. Well, his remains were found in 2013.
Oh, so that's recent, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty recent, yeah.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, he didn't do what Baudouin did, so, I mean, we don't know why he went and did that. But, that was his experience. But Bruniquel is really, again, we live in Toulouse, which is largely a brick city, but Bruniquel is part of this region that has gorgeous villages made out of stone and beautiful, beautiful limestone. Some of it, when you go further into the Dordogne, it gets to be very golden yellow, but in this case, it's white. And I've been to Bruniquel many times, and a couple of times in the summer, on a bright day, it is blindingly white. It's really one of those things. It's rather spectacular, and unlike the Bastides, which is another kind of village, it really is there because of the castle. That was the reason for its existence from the very beginning. So. Yep. It's thanks to Brunehilde that we have this beautiful village to go visit.
Well, thank you to Brunehilde and to Elyse.
Yes, and me and Brunehilde, we're going to be pals from now on. I can tell. I just can tell.
All right. Thank you so much, Elyse.
You're welcome, Annie.
Au revoir.
Bye.
Again, I want to thank my patrons for supporting the show and giving back. Patrons get several exclusive rewards for doing so. You can see them at patreon.com/join us, Patreon. Join us, no spaces or dashes. Thank you, all of you, for supporting the show. Some of you for many years now. You are wonderful. And a shout out this week to new patrons, Christine Mayer, Rebecca Kenny, Max Martin's protege. He's lucky. He's somebody's protege. And Geraldine Stevens, who is a returning patron. I want to congratulate her on the new job. Thank you so much for becoming patrons and making this podcast possible. And thank you also, Ning, for upgrading to yearly. As a small thank you, I'll send you a postcard from Paris and a couple of Join Us in France logo stickers. And they'll be going out this week. Hey, Elyse, how's your Patreon going?
Well, Annie, guess what? My Patreon seems to be doing pretty nicely. It's coming along slow and steady. And this time I have a bunch of names to give shout outs to. And that makes me feel really, really good. It really makes me feel happy.
Who are these special people?
Well, I'm going to start telling you right away. I just want to say to all of you out there, thank you so very, very much. And you just cannot believe how much this helps. It motivates me. I love doing my podcast with Annie, but this is the little further carrot in front of my nose that keeps me going. Really, keeps me going. So let me say a big, big, big thank you to Shelley, to Caroline, to Elyse, who actually sent back a message and would love to have us talk a little bit about how we met. To Kathy, so very, very much for the very generous patronage. Geraldine, with a lovely message that she sent back to me. Christine, too, and to the most recent, Scott. You realize there were very few men in this list, but Scott, I'm glad to have you on board.
Well, that's great. That's quite the crop of new patrons you have. Congratulations, Elyse.
Well, thank you very much, Annie.
And thank you, patrons. You guys are wonderful, because one of these days, I feared if it didn't work, she would tell me, screw this, I'm not doing this anymore.
Exactly. And it's very slow. It's kind of slow and steady. Yeah. And so I guess we can say that if you want to sign up to be one of my patrons, you go to Patreon. No, it's not slash. How do you say that?
So,
I can't remember.
It's patreon.com, patreon.com /Elyse Art, ELYSART. And it will take you straight to Elyse's page and to her corner.
And to my corner. And to my quirky episodes.
Thank you, Elyse.
Thank you, Annie.
My patrons have voted, and here's what they want. Number 1, they want videos. Yes, I want to do that. Number 2, they want to keep the French history brief, and I'm writing one right now. I enjoy doing that very much. And number 3, they want a private forum to discuss French food, recipes, and whatever else we feel like discussing. Lunch Break French only came in at number 4, so I will drop it, but patrons will still have access to previously published episodes. And who knows, once in a while, if I have a great idea, I'll probably create a new Lunch Break French just for fun. When will all of this start? Well, look for the first video late March. Hopefully the forum will be set up before then. I'm hoping for late February. And I'm really excited about this new lineup of rewards. Video was always difficult for me because of extremely sluggish upload speeds at my house. But hooray, I now have fiber optics. Things are so much faster. It blows my mind. And we're the only people in our little cul-de-sac that's been able to upgrade so far because, okay, this is very French, I gotta tell you. Our house was built by a proper developer. The subdivision I live on is actually not really a subdivision. What it was is a farmer who he had a huge garden in the middle of the village, and he cut it up to give inheritance to his 3 or 4 kids. But he had one extra lot that he wanted to sell to somebody, and he sold it to a developer. The man who built our house, he was a house builder, and he did this for himself many, many times over. So he would buy a piece of land somewhere nice and build a house on it and then rent it out. Which is how we got to be here 15 years ago, because it was a rental. And then he got a divorce with his wife. And as is common in France, they had to sell some assets so that they could split up their money. So at that point, they said, oh, we're going to sell the house. And because we were already living there, we got first priority for buying it. And that's how we ended up staying here for 15 years. Anyway. But because the other houses in our cul-de-sac were built by the children of this farmer, they didn't really care about following procedures or rules or anything. They just did whatever they wanted. And so these people have no idea. They didn't put it on the plans where the utilities were coming in from, because it's supposed to be on the plan, and that has been the case for a long time. Well, they don't know. It's not on their plans. They don't know. So our guy, because he was a developer and he was used to this, when I actually called him, because we were his renters for years, so I knew him, and I called him to say, hey, do you happen to know where where the phone line goes through, And he said, it should be on the plan. He couldn't remember it because it was decades ago, but he was right. It was totally on the plan. And the other people say, no, ours not on the plan. We don't know where it is. So my neighbors will be green with envy. I'm enjoying that because it was a bit of work to get it going, honestly. So wonderful fiber optics, that's going to make my life with video much, much easier. And my husband and I realized that we need more storage space. One reason is that the e-bike I ordered and will use to make the videos will arrive in 3 weeks. And there's no way that bike is sleeping outside ever. So that's one reason why we need more room in the garage. But the other reason is that our daughter is coming home for a few months. That's going to start late March, because she's almost finished with her master's degree in computer science, and she has an internship lined up for 6 months. This is at a high-tech company that has offices in the suburbs of Toulouse, and it's really not easy to get there by public transportation. So since her studio is downtown Toulouse, she doesn't have a car in Toulouse. She just uses public transportation. So she'll move home and she'll drive to work for 6 months. And after that, who knows where she'll find her first job. But, I was telling her how French kids don't really think about this, but she's graduating with a master's degree with 0 debt. And if we had stayed in the US, there's no way we could have paid for all of that. And she would have had to take some loans and what have you. So, we're very lucky to have a system that pays for kids' college. Anyway, I digress. So she had this little studio in the city, but she's accumulated some furniture because she's been there for a year or more. She has some pots and pans. She has a bed. She has a chair. She has, that sort of thing. So I looked into renting a storage unit because she has all of this at home already. She doesn't need 2 of everything. Renting a storage unit is so expensive in France. For 4 square meters, they wanted 100 euros a month. And then they wanted me to insure it for another 16 euros a month. So I was like, that's a lot of money for a very small space. I'm not sure it would even all fit in there. So we bit the bullet and we went through our garage. We don't have a very big garage. It's big enough for a car and a half. But the car never goes in there. We just don't, there's no reason to put the car in there because, it doesn't snow or freeze or anything like that here. So why? Anyway, so we went through all of the stuff that had accumulated as it does, and we donated a bunch of things. We took some things to the dump, but it's not going to be enough. So we bought a cheap garden shed. a wooden garden shed. It's not very expensive, 400 euros or something. But we have to put it together ourselves. And again, this is something about life in France. We had a builder come over and give us a bid, and it was going to be 20,000 euros to build something very nice, with a nice roof and blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, we don't need it. And it would take at least a month to get the permit and be able to start on this. So I was like, no, this is not happening. We're just doing a garden shed because everybody around us has a garden shed and we don't. So why not? So, so we bought this little garden shed yesterday. I started I'm going to just do a framed foundation, not a foundation, a framed floor for it. And I started on that yesterday. Today I went to get all the stuff and rented a big old truck. I don't drive big things. It was kind of scary. And it was funny because the people who were supposed to help me load it all up, they had an intern and they asked the intern to come help me put it in and tie it down. And the guy had never done this before and he did not do a very good job. And I didn't know he was the intern. So I could tell that I would have done it differently, but I was like, well, it's his job. I don't really want to tell him what to do. I should have, because one piece of flooring fell off the truck and I had to go back and get it. Anyway, nobody got hurt, but so I'm way oversharing, aren't I? Anyway, so moral of the story is I've been doing a lot of physical work and I'm sore. So I decided, hey, I'm just going to sit there and talk to my listeners and do the podcast, and it'll be much, much more relaxing. And that's true. It's a lot more relaxing than doing construction all day. Anyway, French tip of the week. Today I want to teach you a silly French expression. Avoir le moral dans les chaussettes. Avoir le moral dans les chaussettes. So, for example, il a le moral dans les chaussettes. Okay, so when French people are sad or depressed, our morale drops into our socks because that's what it means. Le moral dans les chaussettes. So, j'espère que vous n'avez pas le moral dans les chaussettes. Otherwise, it's hard. When that happens, it's hard to get it back up out of the socks and into your heart or something. Avoir le moral dans les chaussettes. This week I started on a new book set in France. It's called The Matchmaker of Périgord by Julia Stewart. She's an English lady, but so far all the characters in the book are French. So that's better than the previous books where it was all Anglos living in France. So the book isn't really... it doesn't really get into when the action takes place, but it feels really dated to me. For example, the book opens with people arguing on whether or not you put tomatoes in cassoulet, and my answer is yes, you do. But I can see how people might argue about that. And about some crazy family where they've been cooking the same cassoulet nonstop for 33 years. They just keep adding stuff to it. Yeah, okay, that might sound quaint. I don't think that would happen today, but I can believe that it happened 100 years ago, or maybe 50 years ago. I don't know. Anyway, eventually maybe the book will set itself in time, but if it's supposed to be today, then that bit is no. We'll see. I'm not very far into the book, but so far it's been enjoyable, so that's good. This week in French news, we were all very worried that the pandemic might get worse, but it hasn't. We seem to kind of be stuck at 20,000 new infections detected every day. That's kind of an average, okay? Some days it's more, some days it's less. About 300 people dying from COVID-19 every day. So that's a lot of people dying still. Not as bad as it was, but it's bad. We have 3.5% of the population vaccinated as I record this. Starting on February 25th, general practitioners in France are going to be able to get doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine for people between 50 and 65, but only the ones with comorbidities. But my husband and I both fit that definition, but we've already been told that the doses are going to come in slowly. There's not going to be enough to meet the demand right away. So it's going to be family doctors that will decide which ones of their patients should get the vaccine right away. And the family doctor will call them and tell them to come in and get vaccinated. My doctor knows we're itching to get vaccinated, but I don't know who else he's taken care of. So it might take a while, but there's hope. There's hope. This week in French news, they've been covering painful cases of famous men who are perpetrators of incest and women coming forward with horrible stories. And of course, you've got the people who don't believe them. You know, how can such a good-looking actor or director of Sciences Po in Paris could do such a thing? Well, yeah, they can, and they do. We also got a couple of hospitals, kind of medium-sized hospitals. Their security was compromised by ransomware, and this is new in France. So a lot of education needs to happen when it comes to ransomware here. I'm really saddened by the images of Texas, frozen Texas. So Texans, I hope you're okay. In Utah, where I used to live, they are used to this stuff. I think they'll do fine. But Texas, wow, hang in there. I hope it gets better fast. As for the Mars rover, we don't know if it'll work yet. I hope it does. It's amazing what they can do. I'm just stunned. And you know, with this pandemic, more and more French people are reconsidering their life choices. Traditionally, French people, they start a career somewhere and they kind of keep going in that field, even if they change jobs, but they keep going in that field until retirement. Well, that's starting to change a little bit. I'm hearing more and more stories of fairly young people who do something they don't really love for 10 years, 15 years, whatever, and then completely changing. And it seems that a lot of people are very attracted to becoming a boulanger, which is what we talked about in last week. So Susan, who was on the podcast, said it's more and more boulangeries are closing, and that's true in rural France. But there's going to be more and more people coming into the profession because apparently all the schools that train boulanger are fully booked, and just lots of people coming. I heard about one lady who was she was a tax attorney or something, and then she decided, no, I got to go make bread. And another one, he was a project manager, and just decided, yeah. So this happens all the time in America, but in France, it's rare. So that's why it's worth mentioning. And the other thing that's happening is that French people are actually moving to other European countries. Now, that's always been possible. Legally, it's possible. But it mostly happened with people going to England. I mean, that's what I did. I went to London for a couple of years when I was fresh out of college. But of course, that's not an option anymore. And so now I'm hearing about people moving to Spain, moving to Portugal, moving to Germany. You know, it's kind of fun. It's things moving along. If you enjoy the show, introduce a friend to the podcast and show them how to listen. We're everywhere, and you can even ask your smart speaker to play Join Us in France. Next week on the podcast, an episode with just me about the history of the Paris metro. Some crazy stuff happened, you will see. At least I think that's what I'm going to put out that next week. We'll see. Because I still have a book to finish about it. So I'm going to be busy. We'll see. But probably that'll be it. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Thank you so much for listening. Be well, and I hope you join me next time so we can look around France together. Au revoir. The Join Us in France travel podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2021 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.